All right, Laura, welcome to Crafty.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be with you.
The film "How Do I Tell You This" is absolutely beautiful. We thank you so much for sharing it with our audiences. It's doing really well too. I think I just saw it cross 5,000 views on the platform, so that's exciting, and lots of engagement and likes and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, that feels really good. Really good to see. Yeah, I'm happy.
Awesome. Well, let's take me back to the beginning. How do I tell you this come into existence? And I want to talk a lot about your creative choices and your directorial stamp on it, but kind of just take us to the beginning with the script and the screenplay and developing that.
Yeah. So I originally wrote the script, the first draft of the script, based on something that actually happened to me. The I had a long-term friendship that I kind of wished would be something more, and
Mm-hmm.
had a very similar situation happen to what is in the film. It actually happened at Louisiana Film Prize in
Oh wow!
2019,
Oh wow!
where she came to visit me and see me, meet me for the first time, and it kind of played out, somewhat similarly to how you see it in the film. And I was so like emotionally taken by that. It felt like a story. I didn't even know if it was something that I felt comfortable making, because it was
Sure.
so personal and so like raw, from that experience. But I felt like it was a story I needed to get out of me. And I wrote the first draft of the script, which is very different,
Hmm.
from what made it into the film. But one part of the story that it came into being in that first draft of the script that ended up staying with it, ended up being the germ of the idea that made me really want to make it and um, explore turning this into a film, was the idea to do the split screen finale,
Yeah.
um, where there's a moment, where these two characters who have just had this encounter had kind of their feelings confirmed for each other, but have also come to this place where they don't think it will be feasible. And as they're about to separate, I felt like there was more than just a physical separation that was happening there, and I wanted something to visualize that. And so what I have it written into the script in that moment. It says a black bar comes up and materializes between them.
I love that. So you mentioned that creative stamp stuck with it from that beginning stages of the script, and then in the final film, you have it happen at the beginning and at the end, which I think is just such a beautiful bookend, where they're separate at the beginning, they have this moment where they come together, and then the line appears again and separates them emotionally at the end. And the separation at the beginning and the end sort of mean two different things to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love for you to talk about that journey and kind of that discovery as well.
Yeah, that was something that, again, the finale was always planned to be like a split screen segment, where I wanted, it wasn't just to symbolize the, initially it came into being just to kind of symbolize emotion, like this emotional separation that happens, where she kind of asks him, like checks in one more time before she goes. She's like, "Are we good?" Like, because I think she wants this friendship to continue,
Sure.
and he chooses to hide himself from her one more time. And that's when the separation does not happen when they leave. That's when the separation happens, is that that
Yeah.
this relationship is not going to be the same.
Yeah.
And once I decided on that being a motif, it suddenly opened up this idea of just like, for me personally at the time when I wrote the film, I had not started transitioning yet,
Mm-hmm.
and was very much still thinking of myself in this space of like, oh, like I'm a guy, processing this crush that I had. And I don't
Sure.
know, it was really important to me that the film not prioritize one character's perspective over the other.
Yeah.
And specifically that it give Elizabeth, this leeway and this, really kind of see like, not just like, oh, this is something that is being done to him, but this is something
Hmm.
that affects and hurts her too. to do. And because I didn't want the film to prioritize one perspective over the other, the split screen concept kind of opened up the opportunity to have the audience be like, okay, we're going to stick with both of these characters and we're going to see how they are processing this interaction and how it's affecting both of them. And it really excited me to have like that visual interplay between like what's happening over here, how is Elizabeth dealing with this versus, is Ted just going to go back to this party and be around these people when he's like kind of inside is just emotionally devastated. And there's some really fun, like really playful moments I got to do in the edit with Brandon where things just kind of lined up perfectly. One of my favorite beats in the moment is one near the very end where they're both kind of sitting and at a place where they're kind of maybe getting to be okay, and she sees the note. And while she's reading the note, he happens to be looking towards his side of the frame. And right as she looks up and kind of looks over to his side of the frame, he looks away. It's just, I don't know. That's something that was very playful. And that's something that as we were filming and on set, I was having to kind of keep in my mind of like, okay, what we're shooting right now has to cut together and has to mirror and play with and complement what's happening on the other side of the frame.
Yeah, and I definitely did want to talk about sort of the logistics and stuff with blocking that thing. But, before we get into that, I just really want to harp on this, the weight that you put on both the characters. And you just did such a beautiful job of really fleshing out two individuals in the course of, 17 minutes? And that's really hard to do. So congrats on that. And, I know that... like you mentioned the looking and the looking away, that sort of makes me think of like Before Sunrise, where they're in the record store and they never are catching each other's glance at the same time. And I know that Linklater, kind of played a bit of an inspiration into this style or this story.
Yeah, Linklater was definitely like a huge inspiration when I was writing this film and kind of coming up with the tone. I love the Before trilogy. I love all of those films. And I wanted this film to be sort of like, it's a little bit like mashing together both Before Sunrise and Before Sunset, because Sunrise is kind of like, this is the meet cute. This is like the excitement of getting to see each other and discovering this friendship. But then Sunset comes in as kind of like a little more realistic about it. It's like, oh, but will this actually work? Because it didn't work.
Right.
And there's more of that tension of like, what are these characters going to do and how are they going to do it, handle it. So yeah, that was, Linklater is a huge inspiration. I love his work.
That's awesome. So, the name of our company is Crafty, and that sort of talks about like the snacks that we have on a set, but then also the mentality of our filmmakers having to get crafty in order to make their films and get these things made. Because not a lot of people may realize it's not easy to make a short film. It takes money, it takes crew, it takes all these things. So how did you have to get crafty in order to make How Do I Tell You This?
So this was it was a challenge to get this going just because, so again, I wrote the first draft end of 2019 and I had it cast pretty quickly. Like Misha Milani was a friend that I reconnected with. We went to high school together, and she works in like art department in LA, but she's also an actress and a comedian. And we had reconnected around the time of like Film Prize 2019, and I wrote this, and we wanted to work together on something. So I sent her this script, and she was really excited to potentially play Elizabeth. And then after that, Jeff came along as a casting for Ted. And we were about ready to go for it, but then COVID happened, and obviously everything kind of got put on hold. A lot of even Film Prize films got massively delayed and reduced down what people could do. And for the logistics of what I wanted to do with the film, like as we got closer to our shoot dates, and cases were kind of on the rise, I just decided that like it's not worth it. We kind of need to put this on the back burner. So there was another year that passed before we actually got to produce, and there was a lot of revisions that took place. Misha kind of came in, and I'm really grateful for her that she did this. And I welcomed it from both her and Jeff and, everyone on set to kind of contribute their own ideas. And she brought, was like, she is a Pakistani American woman, and she was like, hey, there's themes in this story already here that I think my background, can strengthen and make more prominent, like things of like the idea of a home, and displacement and having roots, somewhere, and how that kind of determines our path in life. And I was really grateful for that. And she actually has a story credit on the film because I felt like, we sat down together and we went through the script and, together multiple times, did a couple of different passes together where, she kind of talked about her background and her upbringing, and we added that into the character and into the story. And yeah, I'm really grateful for that. As far as on set, I was relatively lucky that aside from the art gallery in the beginning of the film, like this is largely, it's two people talking. There's a few different locations that we, we're kind of bouncing around and filming in, especially for the when we were doing the split screen segment, stuff for the split screen, which basically kind of amounted to B-roll in a lot of cases. So it made it lucky to kind of pick it up and go wherever we did. I feel really awful that I was really happy to work with Camille Gladney, who was our production designer. But when I say that she was a production designer, she basically was like a one-person art department. I asked her to do way too much on this film. It's the kind of thing like indie films, everyone is kind of wearing, multiple hats, and I gave her way too many hats, but she knocked it out of the park, and she was so game for it and such a champ about it. But in hindsight, I was like, yeah, I wish I had like another person just to take a little more pressure off of her.
Sure.
Yeah.
The multiple hats on a film set is so common, especially on the shorts. But she's awesome. She's worked with us on a couple different things, and shout out to her. Well, amazing. So in what other way, like what were some of the challenges of, you have water in this, you're shooting at an outdoor uncontrolled location. What were some of the other challenges that popped up on set?
Yeah. So honestly, like timing and daylight were huge challenges. I've gotten a lot of comments that particularly the centerpiece scene that really is like the heart of the film, where they actually they go to the riverfront and have this conversation where all of these feelings come out. That was the last thing we filmed. Like that was on the last day. That was our big scene. And I've gotten a lot of comments and compliments from people about like, oh, we can tell that you filmed this within the same day because the lighting is so consistent, and that the light, and that's a credit to Dino of like finding the shots and, communicating with our G&E team, what was needed, making adjustments as the day was going. But we started filming that. I believe Misha and Jeff came to set that day early, just to like rehearse and block the scene on our own, so that we could be ready. Like I think we started filming around 4 p.m, and it was like, actually no, I think it was about 3 p.m. In the afternoon. And it's summer days, so the days are long. We're grateful for that. But it also happened that the sun was like setting right behind where we were looking, and so near the end of our time filming that scene, we were really chasing daylight on that. Sure. But it was a thing where at that point, this is a long scene. It was like 7.5 pages, and Misha and Jeff were totally off book. So we got to set, we rehearsed it, we blocked it out, and we had it. So when we were in the scene and we were on set and we were ready to go, we were able to just do the entire scene in a single take. We had these like massive like 8-minute takes where we just do the entire thing, and that really was able to like save us some time. Where I could come in and I could give like some performance adjustments and some beats that I wanted to be hit a little bit harder on the next one, between them. But for the most part, like we had already rehearsed it so much together, the three of us, that like we, they just had it on set. And
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like rehearsal is such a luxury, but it's so I mean, I think especially with a film like this, it's just crucial to develop that trust and that relationship dynamic, because you're, again, like these characters are coming with this total past and backstory. So can you talk maybe a little bit about your rehearsal process with Jeff and Misha?
Yeah. So again, like I said, we kind of sat on this script for about a year. So, and there were, multiple revisions over the course of that year, but I was in pretty steady contact with them where we were, we would hop on Zoom calls and do table reads. We would work through the rehearsal process over Zoom for a while. And then while we were shooting in Shreveport, we would, the first 3 days of our shoot, we were kind of tackling everything else in those scenes. But then the night before we were to shoot that scene, all three of us like sat down together at the table. We were all staying at the same Airbnb, and we sat down at the table together and just went through that scene again and again. And not just like were we like rehearsing the scene and getting it down, but we were also like working together, the three of us, to pare down dialogue. Like if we say, okay, this beat doesn't work, this line doesn't work, this doesn't make sense with what this character said, or what have you, of just like figuring out not just, getting them off book and getting the dialogue memorized, but like making sure that like, hey, like that we have these characters right. And that was something that, we worked together on. And then even after like I went to bed, Misha and Jeff would go and they would continue working on it themselves. And Jeff had his own process. Jeff is love Jeff so much. He's a professional. He's fantastic actor. He kind of has his own process that's a little unique, where I would see, and he would tell me, was like he had a notebook where not just reading the script, but he would write the script, like take his dialogue and his parts, and he would write the entire scene into his notebook. And that's how he got it committed to memory, was the act of like physically writing it. And thought that was really interesting too. I'm not sure if that's common for a lot of other actors to do. That was the first time I'd seen it, but it's very interesting.
I used to actually do that in college with plays, because I'm just such a so there was something about the visual, like I'm a visual learner. And so just like the contact to the page and like the physical motion of that for some reason helped me commit lines to memories. That's interesting to hear that he does that as well. So, I mean, and that rehearsal process that you're talking about, like sitting at the table, being like, this doesn't work, my character wouldn't say this, that kind of thing. The amount of time that saves you on set to actually just be focusing on the scene, that had to be hugely helpful in the execution.
I mean, basically most of what we were figuring out on the day was the shots. And that was something, Dino, my God, just Dino knocked it out of the park so much. I was so happy with the work that he did and what he pulled out. And, there were obviously there were some specific shots that I wanted for the film and was able to kind of direct that. But particularly for that big dialogue scene, I wanted to give him a little bit of freedom. We were primarily on easy rig for that scene. Yeah. And I wanted to give him a little bit of freedom to let the camera float and find the shots and find like the important character beats and moments to get between those scenes, where I really loved, like particularly for Misha's coverage in that scene, the camera keeps kind of going back at, just floating back and forth between them naturally with the conversation. And I really loved that and thought it was really beautiful.
Yeah, the documentary kind of style there kind of lends to the realism and just feeling that visceral nature of the conversation as well. And it really it was a good choice.
It puts us with those characters so much more, because it's one thing to kind of particularly for how meaningful, if we really want to sell how meaningful this relationship and this friendship and connection was to them, I think it's important to put audiences in that moment with them as much as possible, because it's one thing to kind of be like, oh, like I had feelings for this person, didn't work out, whatever, why would anyone care? But the reason we make audiences care is because we see their chemistry and we see that they are enjoying each other. And then once those feelings are confirmed, it's like, okay, now why? Why can't we do this? And it was really important to put audiences in that moment with them as much as possible to make them like feel that. Yeah.
So speaking of audiences, what has it been like, taking How Do I Tell You This around the festival circuit and seeing it with audience members?
It's people have been responded very well to it. The things that most people talk about, for one, I've been very surprised to learn how relatable a lot of people find the story. Because when I wrote it, this was so hyper specific to me and my experience, and I was for a while, especially in the lead up to like making the thing, it was hard to convince myself like, oh, is anyone going to care about this?
Sure.
Is anyone going to relate to this at all because it's so specific? And it seems that the answer to that has been yes. That a lot of people, like I've had people tell me that it's like, oh yeah, I've been in a relationship, I've been in a situation exactly like this before. Like I've had people, that I've wanted to pursue that just, it didn't work out, and it really hurt me. And I've also had people, a lot of comments I get are particularly on the split screen angle. Like that's usually like, that was something that I knew was going to be like, sort of like a pull out all the stops at the end. Big swing, big creative swing, doing the finale as a split screen, and kind of going back to a comment that you mentioned earlier about bookending it. As I was kind of moving forward into getting this film done and made, I knew that like the split screen ending, I needed audiences to be primed for that to come. To come back, not necessarily to be expecting it, but to not have it be such like a weird, like, oh, like what is this, whenever it does come back. Whenever it does come in. And so that's how I ended up doing the bookend at the very beginning of having them be in split screen there. But I also knew that like that finale, it's like, it is like the crucial moment of the film. Like their big conversation scene at the riverside is the heart of the film. But that finale is really like the big moment, and I wanted audiences to stick with it, to not necessarily be expecting it, but to feel like something else was coming, and feel like there was something that was worth sticking around for. And that's largely why I ended up feeling like I needed to do that bookend at the beginning.
Yeah, it works. I mean, it works incredibly well. And, since I'm kind of privy to sort of some of the behind the scenes on the making of this movie, would you talk about moving the shoot from Natchitoches to Shreveport and sort of your initial creative intent with having it in Natchitoches?
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, originally when we conceived of this project, I wanted to film it in Natchitoches. Natchitoches it's my hometown. It's where I grew up, and that's also where I met Misha. We went to high school together at the Louisiana School in Natchitoches, and so both of us were fairly attached to that idea of bringing a film back to kind of where we started, kind of like going back to our roots. And in general, like downtown Natchitoches, I don't know, you've been to Natchitoches, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how
Beautiful.
much of our audience will have been there, but it's like this gorgeous downtown, and once we kind of settled on that as the location, and I went with Megan and Christine, my producer, and the first AD to scout summer of 2020 actually. And once we had kind of settled on like, okay, this is where we want to do it, there were details about the setting that ended up working their way into the script as well. Like the entire idea of having this town be on an oxbow, like on a lake, like a river that goes nowhere,
Hmm.
sort of, being like a symbol and a motif that isolates Ted, where he is. Ended up coming from Natchitoches, because Natchitoches is the downtown Natchitoches. There is a river that runs through the center of town, but it's an oxbow because it's been dammed up at both ends, and it used to be like a part of the Red River.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was like a detail that ended up working its way into the script once we settled on the setting. However, one of the things that happened whenever we decided to postpone the film was the next year, when we came back and we decided that we wanted to try to go for the Louisiana Film Prize again for this film. Natchitoches, because we delayed it a year, when the new year rolled around, 2021, Natchitoches was no longer an approved filming location to participate in the film prize.
Right.
So we ended up having to move production to Shreveport. And we had originally explored maybe filming in Ruston
Hmm.
as well, because that's another place that is, kind of very connected to my roots. That's where I went to college, and it had a little more of that small town feel that I wanted with the downtown. But ultimately, like, it was just easier to do most of it in Shreveport. We found a lot of really great locations in Shreveport. Like, we ended up kind of passing off this little inlet on Cross Lake as sort of like a river, or like a river lake, uh, if you will. And I think it worked out really well.
No, it definitely did, and I think at one point maybe the natural Christmas decorations of Natchitoches were sort of a part of the script as well, but just because they're sort of known for their beautiful lights and setup. Actually, which I still haven't seen, but but I was wondering, was that an impetus at one point as well, or am I wrong about that?
I think it may have been, because there were a couple of dates, so originally we
Sure,
wanted to shoot
sure.
it in summer of 2020, and then we were talking about maybe pushing it to November,
Right,
and
right.
of that same year instead. And then it ultimately got pushed all the way to June 2022. And
Right.
when we were exploring shooting in November, that's when, for audiences that don't know, Natchitoches has this really massive, like, is known for this Christmas festival that happens there, starting the first weekend of December. And they put up Christmas lights before that, and it's really beautiful displays. Town kind of shuts down. Not necessarily shut down, but just gets flooded with people, and booths and stuff like that. And when we were looking at maybe doing November instead of that year, that was something that really excited us about, like, oh, well, if we were to shoot it here, especially for the ending, where they're kind of wandering around town, seeing all those Christmas lights in the background just, adds so much atmosphere and adds so much production
Sure.
value that we normally wouldn't be able to get from, on such a shoestring budget. And ultimately, like I said, Natchitoches ended up not being in the cards
Right.
for a location for the next year, and so we lost a little bit of that. But it's the kind of thing that sometimes simpler is better. There were
Hmm.
times that I did feel a little bit like the film maybe getting a little too complicated, maybe a little overwritten, where getting into the specifics of this situation too much, where I think the thing that people can relate to the most with the film is this idea of, like, oh, there was a person that I connected to really well and was really important to me, and I wanted it to be something else, and it
Yeah.
ultimately couldn't be. um,
Well,
and
it,
that's the simplified version of it, and that's kind of what people take away from it.
yeah, you nailed it. It's wonderful and beautiful, and it turned out so well. So I want to ask you what your advice for young filmmakers would be. People who are, you know, just thinking about making their first film. People who maybe thinking about going to college to pursue film. People who are like, this is my thing. I want to do this. What advice do you have for them?
So I think, hmm, my instinct is to say, like, if you want to make something, just go make it, you know. It's and that's hard for me to say necessarily because it's not really something that I felt like I ever did. For context, like I didn't go to film school. I was working as an engineer, and that's what I studied in school. But I always wanted to be working in film, and you know, it's the kind of thing that it felt kind of inaccessible to me for so long. And I wish I had. That's something I wish I had done, was just kind of pick up a camera and go do it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And something, you know, a big hurdle for me in that process was to get over was, you know, the idea of letting the work be bad for a while, you know.
Yeah.
And that's really hard for me to do. That's really hard for a lot of people to do. But that's how you learn, is like doing it, let it be bad, and then you learn what not to do the next time. Or, you know, it's a little bit of like trial and error in that way. And so I think, like, if you're not going to go to film school, which I've worked with tons of people who did go to film school and have expressed this idea of like, oh, well, I kind of maybe wish I had gone to film school, or maybe considering going back to film school. And almost every single person that I've said that to who did go to film school, it's just like, no, you don't need to.
Yeah.
You don't need it.
Agreed.
I think personally, for my experience, like the way that I learned about film was I watched films.
Yeah.
And I read about films, and like just consuming so much of like what film is, and internalizing what you like, you know, not just what makes a good film and why this works, but also internalizing what is it that draws you to that. What inspires you about that? What kind of stories and characters do you want to see? And what of the stuff that's already out there draws you to it? And finding a way to kind of distill that and make that into your own voice. So I guess that would be my big advice, is watch movies, read about movies, you know, constantly be learning and exploring and curious about art and film and the world, and then just go make something, and don't worry too hard about whether or not it's good at first, because it's not going to be. Just straight up, it's not going to be good.
No, exactly.
The first time you make something. But that's how you learn, and that's how you pick it up, and that's how you get better at it.
That's fantastic advice. What is next for you? What can people look forward to from you?
So I work full-time in film and TV production. I'm currently on an Amazon docuseries right now, and you can see the beautiful hotel wallpaper behind me as a sign of that. Right now, I'm working on pre-production for a couple of short films,
Cool.
2 short films for the Louisiana Film Prize this year, and I am also working on revising. I wrote my first feature film last year. And
awesome.
I'm working on kind of retooling that and refining that to maybe potentially get made sometime in the next couple of years. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we're excited for all of that. And I got a little preview of one of the shorts that you're working on, and it's really beautiful, and I can't wait to see it come to life on screen.
Yeah,
so
I'm really excited to make it, just because I think, I don't know how personal you want to get on here, but personally, like, I think something that hasn't been concretely present in my previous work, this film included, hasn't been like explicitly present, but to me feels kind of intrinsically woven into it, is this exploration of my identity and who I am.
Yeah.
And one of the things that when I realized that I was trans and ultimately eventually transitioned, that ended up being something that was very creatively freeing, you know, in a way where I was like, okay, now I get to explore this. You know, I know what this is, and I get to kind of explore and tell stories about it. And that's something that's really, really exciting and important to me.
That's awesome. Well, that's so exciting. And the work that you shared with me was just magnificent. I'm really, really excited to see you bring it to life. And it's like I told you, even though it's new territory in terms of material that you're exploring, like it still feels like just a beautiful follow up to, how do I tell you this, in terms of like it still has this fabric of these really well rounded out characters, this relationship drama, and yeah, I can't wait to see it come to life.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for sharing How Do I Tell You This on Crafty, and thanks for your time with this interview. Really look forward to seeing what's next for you, and yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of the channel.